Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Galloway Sherrard with Rockwell Automation, and unfortunately, my video is not working today, but I'm not the on-air talent, so we can go ahead with the program. Emily Racklaw is the director of On Your Mark, a program that provides support to Marquette University students on the autism spectrum. She is a lifelong Milwaukee resident and brings 15 years of disability and education expertise to the program. She has presented at several conferences and trained other college success programs on the topics of disability as diversity, neurodiversity, and programming. Emily will be facilitating this session in their own words, a panel discussion with several Marquette University students who have professional work experience. They will share their honest feedback to help employers improve their support of neurodiverse talent. They will also share general recommendations that employers can implement immediately. Please put your questions in the chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emily. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll introduce you to my panel when we get to that part, but I'm really excited that all my students are able to join me. So as she said, I'm Emily Racklaw. I direct On Your Mark here at Marquette University. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about what is autism. So the funny thing is, I guess it's not really funny, haha, but just like funny, the definition of autism has actually changed. Everything is now autism spectrum disorder. There's no more Asperger's, pervasive development disorder, and autism are all under the category of autism spectrum disorder. So it's a lifelong neurological condition. Most of the times people are diagnosed when they're young, but more and more, especially in women and communities of color, we are seeing diagnoses later in life, the teenage years, sometimes even in adulthood. That also impacts males, the ratio of 4:1. But again, part of that is because the way diagnosis is done is that males tend to trigger the diagnosis earlier than women. However, I'm not sure how accurate the 4:1 is based on just how things are done. So what we see, everyone thinks of, okay, social interaction, but also language and communication. And then sometimes there's restricted unusual interests. Sometimes it's also just broad, like wanting to do research on certain things. The big thing is looking at what used to be Asperger's is now everything again is now autism spectrum disorder. We associate that with the lesser childhood delay of language and an average to high IQ. And so basically what used to be Asperger's and high functioning autism are actually very similar, hence everything being put together. Next slide, please. Oh, I got to that part, great. Okay, next slide, because I talked about that one. Awesome. Okay, so let's talking about how we talk about disability. So there's person first language versus identity first language. So person first would be person with autism, or identity first, which is autistic person. Recently, and I'll let all my students share what they prefer as labels. The greater autism community, I can say, is very comfortable with saying autistic person. But again, I always defer to what people say, much like the deaf community. Many of them prefer to say, yes, I'm a deaf person, not a person with deafness. And then we also hear a lot about, oh, someone's low functioning or high functioning. That's not a thing. It's about support labels. Autism, everyone says a spectrum, but it's more of like a circle. And where you need support is how your autism impacts you. So rather than saying someone's low functioning or high functioning, it's saying I have higher support needs in social interaction and lower support needs in academic areas, or lower support needs in language support and language or dexterity, but higher support need in the academic setting. So thinking about it, instead of being a line, it's more of a circle and different color. I wish I had a visual because I just thought of it in my head, but I don't have one. But it's like a circle with different colors, and you kind of like put on the circle where you are. Next slide, please. So I will probably use autistic person throughout this presentation, just so you know. So characteristics. So before I get to the slide, I want to be very clear in saying that this is not what everybody who's on the spectrum experiences. It's just not what it is. So if you've met, like Dr. Stephen Shore said, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, just like any other person. Okay, next slide. So communication challenges, I would say challenge instead of challenges, I would say differences. So sometimes with the social exchange, I do this too for myself, like following their own train of thought and not participating in back and forth conversation. So for example, if we are talking about apples and all of a sudden the train goes, oh, I was at an orchard the other day, and the whole topic then is just responding to orchard instead of talking about um, like the apples that we have right in front of us. Taking language literally, challenges irony, sarcasm, etc. So kind of when you give a direction and you say, okay, put the plates away, what does away mean? Or if it's, I think we were talking about bounce checks the other day, and sometimes I ask, what does a bounce check mean? It's not a bounce, it's not a check bouncing across a table. Or a sense of humor. Sometimes depending on the type of humor, if it's not like, if it's coded, sometimes it might not be picked up on. In speech, you sometimes some people have monotone voice or unusual speaking volume, or sometimes not just the volume or the type, it's also the style in which they speak. So whether it's very formal, and sometimes when you're in a social situation, people be like, well, that's weird, and that person, there's something wrong with that. And then difficulty of understanding, eye contact, gestures, etc. We have many ways that we're communicating at the same time that are these rules that we're supposed to operate by that everybody knows. Unless you're neurodivergent, and specifically unless you're someone who's autistic, those rules haven't been taught to us. So why would those rules haven't been taught, so how would we know? Next slide. And then behavioral differences. So routines and schedules, we all love routines and schedules in general, as whether you're neurodivergent, neurotypical, but for people who are autistic or neurodivergent, having a routine and a schedule is central to being able to optimize how you function in life. So being able to predictably know when something's going to happen makes all the difference. Same thing with rules, knowing that if this, then that happens, perfect. Some people say like intense interest that may or may not be unusual. I guess I really don't know what unusual interest would be. Maybe very specific interest though. Behavior that may be considered oh my gosh, I can't talk today. Behavior that may seem inconsiderate or rude. So for example, leaving conversation and just walking out or saying, okay, I'm done, bye, or I'm not interested in the conversation and walking out, which honestly, I wish people would tell me more often if they're not interested in what I'm talking about, so I could not sit there looking silly while they're bored. Some sensory sensitivities, noises, smells, lighting, especially I'm thinking career-wise, looking in an office with the lights above me right now, thankfully they're able to be dimmed, but that can be things. Taste, food, repetitive movements, to me, that's more like a stimming thing. And again, not everyone experiences that the same way. Next slide. And then I also want to talk, I'm sorry, can we go back one more? My bad. Okay, so behavioral challenges, I want to add to this some social pieces. So when I think of behavior and social things are different, but in terms of like the workforce, we think about the social pieces that go into work, like, oh, someone's having a birthday, and what does that look like in your office? Or we talk about everyone going out, maybe once a month, people go out for happy hour or whatever after work. But sometimes people on the spectrum, or actually people in general, don't want to have the social interaction. They want to go to work and leave work. And again, that can be interpreted as being rude or inconsiderate or not being excited about it. Sometimes there might be a difficulty in expressing or thinking about someone else's perspective or feelings, because it's sometimes can be very factual. This is a rule, this is what happens, so this is how we're going to do it. I kind of talked about with the tone of voice and as being a flat affect, and then people will say, oh, you don't seem very excited. Why are you not excited about this opportunity to work here? And that's really not the case. Or maybe sometimes having like trouble to initiating or continuing friendships or even social interactions at work. We have our work friends and our home friends, but figuring out where they fit in could be a struggle. Okay, now I really am ready for the next slide. Sorry. Okay, so strengths of people with ASD, they're honestly the same as neurotypical people or people without ASD. Some things that people say, they're loyal friends, honest and unbiased judgment, paying close attention to detail, passionate commitment to ideas. My favorite thing is the originality in approaching problems. I think I was struggling the other day, and Oh, I was trying to figure out what to have my dog be as for, I know it's weird. I wanted my dog to have a Halloween costume that went along with what my husband and son were doing. And I was like, I want to do this really elaborate thing. And they were like, what about just making her be a balloon because it goes along with the theme? And I was like, that's brilliant, because I was trying too hard. Diligently working and task focused, really working the task and being able to sometimes complete things much faster than neurotypical people do based on processing, based on how they view the data or view whatever it is. I say data just loosely, but there's other things. There's strong pursuit of knowledge in areas of interest and a strong sense of justice and fairness, which is super important because we want people who want an equitable workplace. We want people who want to make sure everyone at your workplace is striving to be its best. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about the not so great pieces right now, which is, I'm going to tell all my students, this is not you guys. Okay. We are making sure this is not you. Current outcomes. Few adults who are autistic are reporting good quality of life. 80% of them are still living at home. 85% of those people, even with college degrees, are unemployed. And that is because of these unspoken rules we have in the workplace. The way we currently do interviews, when we ask questions like, what's your 5-year plan? Or what color would you be? Or what's your favorite fruit and why? And just these silly things that screen people that don't actually ask about the task of the job. The quality of life, part of being in America, at least being seen as successful, is having a job, having a pursuit outside of your home, and being able to live independently, choosing a partner if you want. And all of those things roll into, usually, are you employed, right? And then we're seeing that a lot of the autistic characteristics that we see as negative or stereotypical can decrease in the 30s, but the mental health issues seem to escalate because of the lack of quality of life in terms of the career piece, which then feeds into the personal piece, mental health, etc. It's a big circle. Next slide. So strategies. So first, I want to say not everyone always thinks people on the spectrum are STEM focused. That is just not the case. I think I only have one student who is STEM focused with us today. There's just so many, every kind of field you can imagine, in just like every other human being, that's where you'll find people's interests who are also autistic. So the first thing you want to do is be specific and clear in all your communication. So if meetings are supposed to start at 2:30, but everyone's supposed to be there at 2:20, it's important that when you're giving those directions, say meeting starts at 2:30, arrive at 2:20 to be prepared. Or if you know it's even something about a process of how you do things, and it's just assume people know steps. People don't always know all the steps. I know I don't always know all the steps. You can consider providing a pilot's checklist of tasks. So I know for me, I have ADHD, so I'm neurodivergent. I have a checklist at my desk every day of the things I need to get done so that I can make sure that I'm efficient and ready to go. I use them at home, even getting ready in the morning. I have a checklist to make sure I don't forget things. But it's just a nice reference point, and it's great for everybody to make sure that everyone at your job is doing things the same way, or that they're getting the same tasks done every day that need to get done. Talking about demystifying the social culture and norms of the workplace. I feel like everybody should be doing this anyway. Like, I want to know when I'm starting at a new job, what's happening. If someone has a birthday, what's the expectation? If is there a social expectation afterwards? Do I have to bring my partner if there is a work outing? Are there work outings that are required? Are there some that are required and aren't? When we start meetings, do we have to talk about our weekends for 15 minutes before we actually get to work? These are all things that we just assume people should know when they come into our office, but they don't know that. But it's especially important for people who are autistic so that they can understand the culture that's going on. One of my favorite things to do is using the stoplight approach. So sometimes when I need to get work done, I don't want people to interrupt me. You can put like a giant, well, maybe not giant, but like a red Post-it note on your door or on your cubicle or whatever. And that means leave me alone. I need to get all my work done. Please do not speak to me. If you can be interrupted and bothered if it's important, or if someone needs to collaborate with you, you can put an orange sticky note on. And then that means, okay, I'm open to some social interaction today. And then you can use green if you're like, hey, I'm ready to be a social butterfly today. And that way we don't have to have this awkward kind of, someone shows up at your door, someone walks up to your cubicle and you really don't want to talk to them, but they want to tell you their whole life story that day. this kind of helps with that. And then for people who struggle with wanting to be social, and again, not everyone who's autistic doesn't want to be social, but if I'm not feeling super social that day, it gives that out without having to awkwardly being in a social situation you don't want to be in. Um, and then the most important thing, I shouldn't say most important, another thing is using skills-based hiring versus typical interviews. I alluded to this earlier when I was referring to some interview questions that don't really have anything to do with the job. I also think it's difficult when you ask a question like, tell me about a problem you solved once. But what kind of problem are you do you want me to ask? Or if you're asking a question that isn't actually asking the question you want answered, you're not going to get the answer you're looking for. Skill-based hiring is actually much more effective. You'll actually be able to see if the person can do the job. So whether that interview is doing yes, you have to ask about, to verbally explain, like, are they competent? Can they do the job that you're asking? But also demonstrate using portfolios, using the work samples, having them do some of the tasks during the job. And this goes for any kind of hiring thing. And then using mentoring. I know a lot of companies are doing this now, but like everybody should be doing it, because going back to that social and cultural norms, we think we explain them all, but then having someone who's been there for years can be like, oh yeah, they said this is the rule, but actually on Fridays, it doesn't say in the rule book, but it's actually casual. And if you don't wear jeans or you don't dress casually, you'll really stick out. Or the opposite, right? Like, oh, it's casual Friday, but no one does that, so make sure you dress appropriately. And that may seem like little things, but if I'm already not feeling comfortable in the social situation, or I'm already feeling like I'm not sure where I fit in here, having one more thing that could go wrong isn't going to be great for my experience in the culture. Okay, next slide. Okay. I stole this slide with permission from my friends at Neurodiversity in the Workplace. These are all the benefits that companies with neurodiverse teams see. So lots of money things. So the 30% greater economic profit margins, outcomes and higher revenue, all these things they're seeing is because by using neurodivergence in the workforce, they're maximizing on the skills we talked about, where they have the unique skill set of looking at solutions different ways. Being able to, but for me, I can hyper focus on a task. One time I think I wrote like a semester worth of curriculum in 3 days. I did sleep and I did eat, but I tapped into my hyper focus and I was able to do that. And that's also a skill set that people with on the spectrum have as well. By maximizing our talents and maximizing the special interests that some of my students have, or some of our people on the spectrum have, you can really see increased profits in your workplace. Next slide. Okay. I didn't have to tell myself to be quiet on time. I finished a little early. So before I introduce my students, I don't know if anybody has questions about the information I shared before I have them talk. I don't think there's anything in the chat, right, Leslie?
Perfect. There is not. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. All right. So we'll start. I'll have my students introduce themselves. Molly, do you want to go first?
Hello, I'm Molly Connors. I'm from Indianapolis. I'm a junior majoring in political science. I haven't quite narrowed down my field of interest for my career. I'm still looking, but right now I'm leaning towards a job in local government.
Excellent, thank you. Matt?
Yeah, hello, my name is Matt Waterman. I am originally from Victoria, Minnesota, and I am currently a senior at Marquette studying supply chain and business program. And I'm still currently on the job hunt, hopefully for a position in a supply chain organization.
Thank you, Matt. Ryan?
My name is Ryan Lynch. I am a sophomore majoring in journalism, and I'm hoping to one day write for a publication somewhere out in New York. But I'm hoping to get a internship at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel this summer.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Blake?
Hello, I'm Blake Gamble. I'm a junior at Marquette. My major is biological sciences, and I live in Shorewood.
Excellent, thank you. Next slide. So these are the questions I'm going to ask of each of my panelists. And after these questions, we would love to have some of you guys ask questions to our panelists, to me, just about their experiences in general. That would be cool. So I'm going to start with Molly. What are some challenges you faced during the interview process?
I found the open-endedness of the questions to be the most challenging part. Sometimes it was hard to tell what the interviewer was asking because of the intentional vagueness of questions.
Excellent, thanks. Matt?
I think for me, I feel like having been in the business program, having had several jobs, including an internship this past summer, and having my dad who interviews people for a living, I feel like I've had a pretty good amount of practice with the entire interview process. I've become pretty familiar with all the typical interview questions, and I've been able to draw on workplace experiences for those answers. But one of the areas I feel like I struggle sometimes is just figuring out how to make my answers sound authentic, even though I've answered those same questions dozens of times before. I just feel like I sometimes get too caught up in memorizing answers and can sometimes come off as insincere. So that's something that I'm progressively working on.
Thanks so much, Matt. Blake?
For me, one of the hardest parts about interview is figuring out what a person exactly is asking me to answer the question. If since it's so open, it's trying to figure out how to narrow it down. Like, they're talking about as an example, Emily Pride, what problem did you recently solve? Like, do they want me to talk about, say, fixing a sink or a social problem?
Great, exactly. Thanks, Blake. Ryan?
One of the biggest issues I faced during the interview process was even just kind of admitting that I am on the spectrum. Like, I know it has to come up at some point, but most of the time, especially with a lot of jobs I've interviewed for, I'll just kind of throw it in at the end, just because I'm not confident that it'll be okay with the interviewer, no matter what the paper says. So I think that's probably one of my biggest struggles.
Awesome, thanks, Ryan. Our next question is, what are some examples of challenges in your workplace or in a workplace that you've worked in? We'll go back to Molly.
I find the most challenging thing to be situations where I have to improvise or come up with something on the spot, especially solutions to issues, especially when communicating face to face or over the phone with other people.
Thanks, Molly. Matt?
This past summer, I had an internship with a company called Bix Produce, and my main task for that was creating a standard work process for how to use a new scanning system they were implementing. And my main goal was to kind of teach all the delivery drivers how to use it so that they could in turn continue to use those throughout the rest of their time there. And I think essentially I was the only person in the entire transportation department that kind of knew how to use it. So that, combined with having to ride with different people every day and kind of communicating the same information, it felt like it was a lot of responsibility to handle, especially being on the spectrum. But I think ultimately I was able to kind of work with what I was given and kind of make the most out of the summer. But that was the main challenge that kind of stands out to me.
Thanks, Matt. Blake?
For me, one problem that a challenge I face in the workplace is if I don't know how to perform a certain task, or if I don't know where to find something, then the challenge is, where can I find someone to help me out, or who do I ask to help me with a problem?
Excellent, thanks, Blake. Ryan?
One of the biggest challenges I have is that oftentimes I just work at a different pace than most of my colleagues. So if there are time sensitive assignments or things that need to be done, oftentimes I'll just end up working slower, not intentionally, it just happens. And that just kind of naturally working at a slower pace has hurt me at times in the workplace, but I'm working on, just getting over and, just trying to get with everyone by communicating about, my disorder and, just making sure that I can talk to people.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, our next question is, what are some examples of things that your employers have done well? And we'll go back to Molly.
Some things that employers have done well is being patient and understanding of like the learning curve of a new job and answering questions when I have them, especially at the very beginning, and then helping to establish like routines and procedures, whether it's like making checklists or like to-do lists, so that I can get in the habit of the work more quickly.
Thanks, Molly. Matt?
One of the main things my most recent manager had me do that I thought was really helpful was, I think at the end of every week, he would have me kind of type up a recap of what I did the previous week, just to kind of touch on kind of everything I learned, everything I did, and just to kind of see how it relates to the overall project I was doing. And it also just helped me hold myself accountable for the work I was doing. And it just kind of showed him kind of the things I was learning along the way. And I think also before I began the internship, I kind of had a meeting with him, and I had let him know about the fact that I was on the spectrum, and I kind of explained that to him. And I thought that kind of helped just with overall communication and just letting him know what the expectations were for the whole summer.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Blake?
Something like an employer can do well for someone on the autism spectrum is like being just always willing and able to like answer questions and just like make sure to state everything that's clearly, and just make sure there's like no like miscommunications or misinterpretations of like an answer.
Awesome. Thank you. Ryan?
I would say like something that my employers have done well is that they've just been very receptive when I've asked questions, or if I've like needed things repeated. Like they're just like they don't really get on me about it. They're just like, okay, like if you work at a slower pace, like that's fine. Just as long as you're getting the things done. So I think it's been the most beneficial thing that they've done in my workplace.
Awesome. Thanks. Before I get to the last question on here, I do want to let you guys know I thought of 2 more questions that you can choose to answer and have extra time to answer. But I also want to talk about the question piece about asking questions. Sometimes people on the spectrum people think they're rude questions, or like, why do you need to know the information questions? And that's not the case. They are clarifying questions so that they can understand the task you're asking them to do. If you are giving directions that don't include all the steps or seem vague to someone who's autistic, they're going to ask clarifying questions, not to be rude, not to challenge authority, but to understand the task that's at hand. Okay, my third to last question this time. What do you guys want employers to think about? Let me try that again. What do you want employers to know about hiring people on the autism spectrum? Molly?
I think getting to know the people you hire as people and as employees first and foremost before being autistic, before their autism, will tell you more about what you can do to make it easier for them to work and to help them do the best job that they can.
Thank you, Molly. Matt?
I think the most important thing employers should know is that although we do have disabilities, we're no less capable than someone who is not on the spectrum. I truly believe that there's nothing they can do that we can't do. The only difference is it might just be a little more difficult for us to get there. I know, at least for me, I'm generally not someone who wants to use the fact that I'm on the spectrum as a crutch, but at the same time, it's also a part of who I am and just how I go about my life. So I think it's important for employers to understand just what exactly being on the spectrum means and how that specifically affects kind of the way we go about our work and just our life in general.
Thank you, Matt. Blake?
Like, I think something that employers should know is just like to like be willing to like help out, especially early on in when you're employing a person on the spectrum, and also just to be like adjusting expectations so that like they match the work a person on the spectrum is doing.
Perfect. Thanks, Blake. Ryan?
Yeah, honestly, I would agree a lot with what Matt said in terms of what I would want employers to know about hiring people on the spectrum. Employers need to know that autism, the label that often comes with autism and ASD as a whole, is not representative of the entire spectrum. And even then, like for people on the spectrum, it doesn't make us any less capable or any less willing to do a job. It just needs a little bit more explanation to us than people who are not neurodivergent. But all in all, we can still do things just as well, and in some cases better than people who aren't on the spectrum.
Thanks. Are you guys ready for my bonus questions that I didn't tell you ahead of time? My fault, because I just thought about them while you guys were talking and sharing such awesome information. For our audience, now, if you guys have questions you want to ask our students or ask me, please start putting them in the chat. I do have a couple bonus questions to give you guys some time to think about your questions and put them in. So my question was, we talked about the challenges during the interview, but I'd love to hear like what you thought went well when you were interviewing for your different positions. I won't make you go in order. But Matt, I know you've had a lot of experience, so if you'd be willing to answer that question.
Yeah, I think I've had a pretty fair amount of experience at this point in my academic career, along with a couple of jobs I've had. So I've found that kind of the more experience I've had, the more I've kind of been able to kind of tie those experiences in the interview questions that I've been asked. And I think, obviously, I don't know, but from my perspective, I feel like I'm able to give more articulate answers and kind of explain more of the skills that I've learned. I mean, you can read all about skills in a book, but until you really kind of put them into practice, it doesn't really mean anything. So having had a good amount of experience, I feel like I've become a lot stronger in that area.
Thanks, Matt. Does anybody else want to answer that question? I'm sorry, Matt, to put you on the spot. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that? Ryan, Matt, I'm sorry, Ryan, Blake, or Molly, or you can pass, that's fine.
I think asking questions about the job that you're interviewing for, what, like why you want to work there, stuff like that. I kind of enjoy answering those questions because when you really have a passion for the place you want to work, I think that will always come through in your answers, and it's something you can feel confident in answering.
Thanks, Molly. Ryan, it looked like you wanted to jump in too.
Honestly, no. My interview was super easy. I
Fair.
just sat at a bar and talked to the guy. It wasn't really too difficult, but yeah, no, I mean, I, ditto on what everyone else said.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay. I'm going to skip my question. We have two questions in the chat. One is, what are some of the opportunities you found by being, opportunities created by being on the spectrum? So what are some opportunities you think that being on the spectrum has given you in terms of how you view the world, how you view problems, maybe how you've done in class? And I will give you time to think about it. In the meantime, think about those questions, and I'm going to answer this other question. The best way to connect with you all about employment opportunities. Can I get a thumbs up from the four of you if you're cool with me putting emails in the, you guys want to put your email in the chat if you're comfortable? Okay, I will do that.
Who are we giving our emails to?
People want to connect with you about employment opportunities.
Oh yeah, cheers. Definitely.
Um, and then Ryan, you are one of my biggest self-advocates. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot again. Um, what are, do you think, some opportunities or some, I want to say like the positive sides, because people always think, sometimes shouldn't say always think, people go negative when they think autism or they think Asperger's or ASD. What do you think are some opportunities there?
I mean, like opportunities for what?
So that was my question. And this is Leslie, and I was just what you were talking about, too vague. What do you mean in
Yes.
terms of opportunities? What are some examples of opportunities that from in the workplace at your internships that you found in the work that you were performing at the internship that were opportunities because being on the spectrum?
Like
Right.
like what I haven't gotten a internship yet.
Oh, so Leslie, do you mean like by like a neurodiversity hiring
Like
program
maybe
or?
like Matt's had a couple internships, for example. Was there anything
Oh, Matt, yeah.
he was able to do faster or see quicker or
We're still talking to Matt.
Hold on. Yeah, Matt went away. Matt's still here. Matt, what do you think? I mean, Alan, are you still here, Matt? I don't know where you went. Okay.
Yep, I'm
Okay.
still here.
That's cool. So Matt, like I know with your internship, you had that awesome opportunity to develop that SOP. What was that like to be able to do that on your own though? And like, was that, did you tap into some of your skills from like with your autism to get that done?
Sorry, you kind of froze there for a second. Could you just repeat the last part of what you said?
Yeah, no problem. So you had the opportunity to create the SOP. What did you, were you able to tap into any of like your special interests or any of your special or any of your skills that are unique to you because of you being on the spectrum to get that task done?
I think kind of one of the main things is I think some of that comes along with being on the spectrum is I pay very close attention to detail and a lot of the projects that I do. I just want to make sure that I gather like all the most relevant information and I kind of test it a couple times before I like coming out with the final product. So I created a rough draft and then after a couple weeks or so, I would kind of edit it with some of the more relevant pieces that I gathered throughout my time that I created. So I just think, I mean, it's not exclusive to people with autism, but I think that's just something that I put extra emphasis on myself, that it's putting in, they're having good attention to detail for that project specifically. It helped out a lot through the internship process.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Something I realized I didn't even talk about is what On Your Mark is. Doing this way at the end. I forget. So what we do at Marquette is we provide support to students who happen to be autistic. And a lot of our big focus is not just getting a degree, but making sure they're job ready and career ready or grad school ready, whatever it is they want to do after they graduate, because having a nice piece of paper that has your name on it with a fancy font is great. But if you're not doing what you want with it, that makes it challenging. So that's the big outcomes and ways we support. We provide social support, executive functioning support, and actually, I mean, pretty much everything. We're like Jack and Jills of all trades, if you will. Anything our students need, they come to us and we help navigate it, whether it's needing a piece of technology for class that because they didn't bring it with them, or if it's as big as I have a giant paper due and I'm not sure where to start to break it down. Doing all the work themselves, but talking out the process of what that looks like. My other question is a selfish question, and you can answer it how you will. What are some ways that you think On Your Mark or being in On Your Mark have helped prepare you for the workplace? You know it was coming. I can't believe I didn't put it on there. Molly, you're the first person, but I know you don't like to go first. I'll let you think about this one. Ryan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think On Your Mark has really set me up. Just it's given me the structure to kind of like understand what I need to do to succeed in the workplace. It kind of just gives me, I guess, just a greater comprehension of how like I'm supposed to work and like an understanding of like the importance of deadlines. And that's something that I still like kind of struggle with, but like it helps me like work on it. And I think by the time I graduate, it'll I think I will like fully mastered everything that I need to for the workplace.
I think you're going to use whatever strategies that work best for you. You're going to be awesome, Ryan. Matt, do you have an answer for that question, or you can pass?
Oh yeah, I think one of the biggest things on your marks kind of helped me with is just kind of organizing all my kind of responsibilities on a weekly basis. I know before using the schedule planner that On Your Mark has provided us with has been really helpful, just making sure that I have all my deadlines in order, just making sure that I don't forget anything and I know kind of what I have all my deliverables on a weekly basis. So that's definitely helped me with just being organized and knowing what's expected of me from an academic basis on a daily and weekly basis.
Thanks, Matt. Blake, would you like to answer that question, or you can pass?
Sure. Like, I believe something that like On Your Mark has helped me with is like kind of the interview process, like how to answer questions, is like just break it down for me into simple steps so I can just like really be able to understand what like the interviewer is asking of me.
Thanks, Blake. Molly, you can pass or you can answer.
For me, the most helpful part has just been the personal part. So like if I ever have a question, I pretty much can just walk into On Your Mark and ask either Emily or your mentor anything about like school or something with a professor or jobs. There's always someone to ask questions about. That's been really helpful. And then also, I want to answer the question that was in the chat. I have a sort of literal answer. So one thing with special interests is you get really good at researching stuff. And I found that when I interned in City Hall this past spring, and when I was doing research for my supervisor would ask me to do just a quick little research on like a legislative proposal, just a little 15-minute thing. It was really easy for me to research that, and I found that I wasn't drawing on skills that I learned in school, but skills that I had developed from looking up things that I was interested in and passionate about. And so that's just a very literal opportunity that I had from freelance working.
That was a really good answer. That was better than the question how I asked the question. We have a couple minutes left. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. Otherwise, I'm cool with letting people have a few extra moments of personal time. Everyone's emails are in the chat. Also, if you do the next slide, please. Oh, there's a new message. You can also email me directly as well if you didn't catch all those emails in the chat, and I can connect you with each of their students. They would, every single one of them, be an amazing employee, and they are all currently employed or have been with internships, things like that. So I will thank people for their time, and I will give a big, huge thank you to Molly, Matt, Blake, and Ryan. Thanks so much for your time. I know midterms are next week and you guys are preparing for those, but thanks so much for giving me your time, and everyone else for giving us your attention today.
Thank you. You did an excellent job, Marquette.
Thanks.
And the chat, actually the website for the final closing session is in the chat. So please log on to that. But again, thank you On Your Mark program and Marquette University students for sharing how we can do better as employers and supporting you in the workplace.